when I was asked to do this, and it's actually a question I've struggled with over the last little while, when Ezra put the question to me that way, what is it about this Terry Glavin guy that has made him so closely identified with the concerns of the Jewish community in Canada and the cause of Israel? You can kind of take that question in a couple of ways. In one respect, it's almost like, how come you're such a nice guy, if you put it in that tone of voice. Or what's a sweetheart like you doing in a place like this? And it's a difficult and complicated story, and because usually I have a sort of a lectern, and I've published a book and I'm doing a reading and everyone's sitting around like beatniks. I don't do this sort of thing, and I've never done this kind of thing with the clicker and wandering around before quite like this. So what I thought I would do, because I like a challenge, I thought this would be a little bit ambitious, is I'm going to answer that question in the form of a history of the world, starting not as far back as Adam and Eve, or Cain and Abel, but their kid brother Seth. I figured I'd move it forward a little bit. And I'm hoping that you might see why there's some method to this madness. These beautiful children are in a village in Afghanistan called Balkh. It's a sleepy little village. It's east of Mazar-e Sharif in the north, in the province of Balkh. Balkh is where, in the Persian tradition, Kayumars, the old sort of Zoroastrian Adam, settled at close to the beginning of time. We do know that the people who settled that area coming over the Amu Darya River several thousand years ago spoke a language that now 1 billion people on the world, around the world speak. It's a sleepy little village, very interesting place, very friendly. They grow melons and pomegranates and some wheat and various sorts of vegetables. In the Islamic tradition, Cain and Abel are Qabil and Habil, and their kid brother is not Seth, but rather Sheeth ibn Adam. Sheeth ibn Adam is right there, according to the people. That is where he is buried. That's his tomb. What we know is that about 2,000 years ago, Balkh was second only to Satyagriha as a place of reverence in the Buddhist tradition. There was a great Buddhist university of Navahara was there. What else do we know about Balkh? It was the capital of the Kingdom of 1,000 Cities. The Greco-Bactrian Empire of Alexander the Great was Balkh. Tamerlane crowned himself king there. The sword of Islam that wreaked havoc between the Volga and, well beyond the Indus anyway. Can't remember exactly. The history of the world is a long story. There was also Ibn Sina, the sort of father of physics and medicine, who is known in the Western tradition as Avicenna, who was a significant influence on Thomas Aquinas, who was the foundational theologian of Catholicism. There was Hiwi al-Balkhi, who, a great Jewish intellect, contrarian, composed 200 rationalistic objections to the miracles of the Hebrew Bible. There was Aurangzeb, the conqueror of the world, came from Balkh. Omar Khayyam, the great poet, the author of the Rubaiyat, was from Balkh. Rumi, the great poet, the greatest poet of the Persian tradition, is Rumi al-Balkhi. He was from Balkh. These are the walls of the Bala Hassar. It was destroyed by Genghis Khan. It was rebuilt, and it's just an astonishing place. And what's interesting about it for me, that's the place where Rumi's father taught in Balkh. Sher Khan, 7 years old, second from left. He was kind of like my tour guide. Is that why don't we know about it? Why doesn't the world know about this? And why is it that there's all of this stuff about Afghanistan that we don't know and that doesn't fit in the way that we talk about these places of war and dislocation and savagery, when you have all these really, really nice people there, essentially? And there's a really interesting reason for that, and it involves what another journalist, a fellow by the name of Robert Byron, in the mid-1930s, he's crossing the plains, heading to Balkh, and hundreds of Jews are coming in the opposite direction, fleeing to ultimately Herat. He goes to Balkh, he has lunch with the governor, Muhammad Gul Momand, and the story unfolds that through the 1930s, the Third Reich was the major diplomatic legation in Afghanistan. They funded the kingdom, and they discovered in Balkh what they thought was the epicenter of the Aryan master race. And Balkh was being destroyed at the time. And one of the reasons why there's so much of Balkh is obliterated is because of a project by the Third Reich to create a new Paris with the concentric rings in the arrondissement, and ethnic cleansing, Pashtunization, and ridding Balkh of the Jews. This is something that I think is a really important thing to understand about Middle Eastern history and the struggles that Israel is facing today. It's not the only way of understanding, but it's an important element. This is Robert McChesney, professor of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies, New York University, who describes the relationship between the German Aryan master race ideology and Pashtunization in Afghanistan. You talk to Afghan intellects, and it's absolutely uncontroversial for them to understand Talibanism as a recrudescence of exactly what they experienced in the 30s. The same master race stuff, the same fanaticism, the same barbarism, the same phenomena for which we really don't have words these days. Similarly, people are probably familiar with the story of Jeffrey Herf, or the work that he's done in tracing the history of Nazi propaganda through the Second World War in the Arab world, and Matthias Kunzel in Iran, and the work that he's done explaining how European fascism, German Nazism, informed virulent strains of Islamism in the 1930s to produce a great deal of what we're seeing today. Now, when I was trying to figure this kind of stuff out, my friend Abdul Rahim Parwani, an Afghan, same kind of guy as me, came from the left, and it was a very disorienting time. The anti-war movement had become the main iteration of left-wing politics, and 2006 was the Hezbollah war. And I started to ask a lot of questions back then that led me to a lot of other people who were asking similar questions. And it was not a particularly pleasant experience, but it does explain to some great extent how it has come to pass that I have come to see Israel and the concerns of the Jewish community in a slightly different light. It goes back further than that. It goes back to my ma. My mother, the spy. I particularly like this one. This is in the one of the local New Westminster papers. She was an Irish Catholic girl, one of the Bletchley girls, the Enigma Code, Alan Turing, all that stuff. That was my ma. She worked in that project. Very proud of herself. There's a little line in the bottom of that story, and she describes how, after raising 4 cantankerous and lovely Irish Catholic boys, she goes and works with Rebbe Fierstein and Shandy Fierstein. And she describes them, they're the children that she helped raise up as her Jewish children. There's Aviva, Panina, Perlea, Yosef, David, Ali Shava, Nechama, and Shifra. Thank God. If I'd forgotten one, my mom would have killed me, right? Her Jewish children, right? And so, people say, I didn't know you were Jewish. And I, well, actually, I'm not. It's complicated. It's family. But that's a hell of a nicer way of getting the question put to you than how did it come to pass that you have sort of degenerated into a left gatekeeper of the false flag Ziocon hegemony, right? Didn't know you were Jewish. That happened to me once at the Temple Emmanuel in Victoria. And my friend Sid Tafler kind of answered the question for me. He says, well, of course, You know, as everybody knows, there's 5 strains of Judaism. There's Reform, there's Conservative, Orthodox, Ultra-Orthodox, and Irish Catholic, right? This is an interesting thing happened to me. I was recently, a couple of years ago, I was in Tel Aviv. I'm going to wrap this up. God, I did this within 12 minutes. It's going to work. Benny Weinthal and Fabian Glogowski. Benny works for the Jerusalem Post. Now, strong drink was taken, so I'm not quite sure exactly the detail, whether it was Fabian or Benny. We were talking about travels and the work we were doing. I was going off to Kurdistan. And Benny said, you know, the thing about the Kurds is they're like Jews without an air force, okay? And about 3 weeks later, I'm crossing the Tigris River, and it's a really emotional experience for Kurds at the time, crossing from the Kurdish regional government area into Rojava, which is sort of the Kurdish liberated zone in northern Syria, because they're crossing from one autonomous Kurdish jurisdiction into another autonomous Kurdish jurisdiction, and this ancient part of the Tigris River. And as we're crossing, it's very emotional, and people are kind of weepy and happy. And a lovely young Kurdish fellow, one of my traveling companions, Gurka Norman, asked me, so, you know, where have you been? What's up? Like, why here? Well, you know, I was in Turkey and Istanbul, talked Free Syrian Army. I was in Israel, and, Israel, wouldn't it be great, you know? I mean, Israel, my gosh, those guys are great. The thing about the Israelis, you know, those Jews, is they're like Kurds, but with an air force. And so I'm only going to wrap this up by saying, look, I don't know. How did it come to pass? I think it came to pass partly because of family, partly because of my old high school teacher, Fred Lepkin. God, now I feel like one of those Oscar things. I'm running out of time. People to thank. But one very quick last thing, and it's this, is what's not to like? I mean, for God's sake, look at yourselves. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And I do have a little bit of advice for you, by the way. It's a question that's been put to the sages from the beginning of time, and I think I've got the answer. And it's a sort of what to do now, what then do we do question. And it's what you do. And what you do is you do your best, you learn from your mistakes, you sleep the sleep of the just, you get up the next morning and you start all over again. And you remember the admonition of the Torah, the welcoming of strangers, the love of strangers. And that's the last point. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you so much. I think it's Temple Shalom has led the charge in Canada for the degree to which the Jewish community in this country has shown leadership in accepting and sponsoring and resettling Syrian refugee families in this country. Give yourselves a round of applause for that. And thank you for the honor of me being here.